Original catalogs are one of the best ways to learn about the products that were offered by the American watch factories. These catalogs serve as original sources describing the characteristics of the different grades that the companies produced at the time. They are also an excellent basis for understanding the watches that we all enjoy collecting. Sometimes the lingo used to describe these watches can be a bit confusing to newcomers to the hobby. So in this video, we're going to take a look at an Elgin pocket watch and compare it to the descriptions that were published in wholesale catalogs at the time. So this right here is an Elgin grade 155 manufactured around 1897. I should note that the case is not original. This movement would have likely been sold in a hunting case when it was new. However, the rest of the watch appears to be original. So this is the Benjamin Allen and Company catalog from 1900. It was published a few years after the estimated production for this Elgin movement. And if we take a look at the page that has the Elgin 16 size movements, we will find the description of the 155 right here. It was common, especially for Elgin, to list movements in pairs. One grade number would be assigned to the hunting configuration, and the other would be assigned to the open face configuration. So we can see here that the 155 and the 161 are sister grades. This practice differed from companies like Waltham, which typically sold open face and hunting configurations under the same grade classification. So when we see the 155 listed with the 161, the 155 is the hunting version and the 161 is the open face version, but this description will apply to both grades. So the first thing that I like to look at when looking at these catalogs is how the grade falls in the company's product line. So we see 7 distinct levels here in the 16 size section, and they range from $8 all the way up to $90. Generally, the list price will increase as the quality of the movement improves. So in this case, we find that the 155 and 161 serve as the runner-up to the premium grade 156 and 162, with the primary difference being the jeweling and the level of adjustment. So if we take a look at the description here, the first thing that we see is nickel. So this will refer to the finish of the movement plates. So, and we can see here that the movement plates are nickel. So this would usually be shown as either nickel or gilt. So you see gilded there, which is another word for gilt. And then for two-tone movements, it's described a little bit differently, usually like sometimes gold over nickel or something like that. So next, we see the level of adjustment, and this says adjusted to temperature and position. So during this period, Elgin did not specify the number of positions in catalog descriptions. However, when it says adjusted to position, it's generally accepted as indicating either 3 or 5 positional adjustments. And then you can see over here the 156 and 162 are described the same way, adjusted to temperature and position. And we know based on later catalogs that the 156 and 162 were adjusted to 5 positions. And unless it's marked on the movement, there's not really a way to tell the exact level of adjustment simply by looking at the movement. Even if we were to take this and time the watch in different positions, it may or may not yield reliable results due to the age of these watches and how many watchmakers have worked on them over the years. So next in the description is 17 rosy ruby jewels. And you can see here on the movement the reddish color on the jewels on the top plate. And then it says 5 pairs gold settings. So again, we look at the jeweling, and right through there, I get a pointer. Right through here, you'll see the gold settings encircling the jewels. So the gold was a premium option on the higher end movements at this time. Lower quality grades would have either composition settings, which means that they were made out of some sort of alloy or brass, and the other option is to have the jewels burnished into the plates. So those are the two other jeweling options that we see. And this one has gold settings. So the 5 pairs refers to how many pairs of jewels are through the train here. So for each jewel that you see on the top plate, there is also a jewel on the lower plate for each of these wheels in the train. So you have 7 jewels in the balance and the escapement, plus the 10 from the 5 pairs of jewels through the train. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that would equal 17 total jewels. An easy way to determine if a movement features more than 15 jewels is by looking at the center wheel here. And while exceptions do exist, if this center wheel is jeweled, the watch will almost always contain 16 or more jewels. However, the majority of the movements from this particular era with the higher jewel counts will be marked accordingly. And we see that with 17 jewels right here. So next in the description, it says micrometric regulator. This was also a premium feature, usually retained for finer watches. This is Charles Moseley's patent regulator, and it's found on a lot of Elgin watches. The mechanism allows very small changes in the regulator to change the rate of the watch. So if it's running slightly slow, this regulator can be adjusted to make the watch run faster and vice versa. So the next thing that we have is the Breguet hairspring. This refers to an overcoil applied to the hairspring that helps with isochronism of the watch, and it improves precision. This feature was fitted on most Elgin watches during this era, and you can see that even the lower grades have this. So it would certainly be expected on a higher grade like the 155. So the next option is that's listed as double sunk soft enamel dial. So if we flip this over, we will see the double sunk dial, and this was another feature reserved for finer grades in the Elgin product line at the time. And the soft enamel was a different composition of enamel that Elgin had started using for dials, but this actually transitioned to a different type of dial on the finer watches within the product line within a few years. So the next option that we see is the dust band. And this you can't see from the outside, but there's a band that encircles the movement, and it basically just keeps dust from entering the watch mechanics. So we move on to the next option. It says first quality moon hands. So this is a detail that's often overlooked, whether the hands on the watch match the catalog descriptions during the era that it was produced. Especially on a lever set watch, the hands were frequently bent or broken with general use. And when they were replaced, they were often fitted with whatever the customer desired or whatever was available at the time. As a result, distinctive hands like these moon hands were often replaced with spade hands or something else. So using the catalog description as a guide, we know these hands are at least correct for this watch. And sometimes watch companies change the style of the hands during production. So it's important to study descriptions as close to the estimated production date as possible. And so in this case, we've got a watch that was produced around 1897. This catalog is actually from 1900, so it's just a few years in between. So then we take a look and it says finely finished throughout. So what does that mean? If we take a look at the movement again, this is marketing language used to indicate that the movement received an extra level of finishing at the factory. And usually this was more detailed engraving, a special finish on the winding wheels, gold inlay, or intricate patterns. So basically what this means is the watch was finished at a much finer quality. So then we get to the last thing right here, pendant set. And so this one should be self-explanatory, but it simply means that the watch is set by pulling out the pendant rather than being lever set. So I can pop the crown out. And that's how the watch is set. So we see that in this catalog, this movement would have sold for $40 right here. If we compare this to the grade 156 and 162, 156, 162 at $90, the question that we ask ourselves is, well, what would we get for the additional $50 in price? So this one features 21 jewels in raised gold settings. So we can see that here in the illustration, raised gold settings, compared to the 17 jewels in flush gold settings on the 155. The extra jeweling in this one comes from the paired cap jewels on the pallet fork and the escape wheel on both the upper and lower pivots. And then we see in the description that it also says cone pivots on these wheels. And basically that just took advantage of the cap jewels that were evident right there on the upper and lower pivots there. So they would basically reduce friction as the wheels operated. It's important to understand that grades were sometimes adapted over time. And this was usually due to a changing market, or certain features were being developed, or they were made more efficient in the factory. And usually these changes are pretty minor. So what we're going to do now is take a look at, so this is the 1900 catalog. So now we're going to take a look at the 1903 catalog. Let's find the Elgin page. So here we go here. This is the 1903 edition of the same catalog from the Benjamin Allen and Company wholesaler. And we find a slightly different description for the grade 155. So I'll put this down here again. And here's the 155, and you can see that the open face version has already been replaced with the bridge model, like this one, the 246. But in this catalog, they're still selling the 155 as the hunting grade. So we see that the movement is now described with a steel escape wheel and also a gold train or gold wheels. We also see various other additions that were omitted from the previous catalog description, such as the display winding work and the patent recoiling click. So most, if not all, of these features were actually present in the old for the old catalog. They just weren't mentioned in the description. So you can see the patent recoiling click here, the display winding work. And so just because the catalog doesn't mention a feature doesn't mean that it actually was not in the watch. So one change that we do find is with the dial. This 1903 description now states double sunk glass enamel dial. And so that differs from the previous catalog that said soft enamel dial. So what does that mean? So the watch that we have is actually fitted with a glass enamel dial. You can see it shimmer right there. So this indicates that the dial was now being produced with a clear glass glazed layer that resulted in a reflective property like this, instead of what we see as a more matte finish with the soft enamel. So during this period, the glass enamel dials were gaining in popularity on finer watches like this. So hopefully that shows you how we can take a watch and look at the catalog descriptions and learn more about the changes that might occur over time. And that was taking a look at the Elgin 155 movement and comparing the catalog descriptions from 1900 and 1903. And the more that you study these original sources like these catalogs, the better you'll become at identifying these details when looking at the watch movements. So if you enjoyed this video, I hope to do more like this in the future. Please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to be notified about future videos, and we'll see you next time.